For more on what to expect, we cross to Nompu, who is in Cape Town. Nompu, good afternoon. You've been speaking to a lot of people about what their expectations are today. What have they said to you?
Thanks very much, Diabo. Well, of course, we've spoken to economists, we've spoken to Labour, and basically the feeling is that, of course, there's an anticipation that we're going to get this shortfall in terms of revenue. So the big question mark is, where is government or National Treasury going to manage to get the 15 billion rand that it indicated it would be looking for in the midterm budget last year? And so, of course, there's a lot of concern on the Labour side that we don't get tax increases, and also economists saying that there still needs to be more efficient spend of the funds that government actually handles. But then, of course, another view is that, austerity needs to come to an end because you can only spend so much, you can only cut so much. Otherwise, then you begin to affect basic services. Apparently, there are lots of positions that are available in the public sector that need to be filled in order for critical services to be delivered. But because of moratoriums on employment and budget constraints, those positions are not being filled. So something somewhere is not quite working. So we've been speaking to those people, and also have an academic with me to discuss the budget further. I'm joined by Professor Andre Roux. He's an economist at the Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. So this year is a tricky one for the ANC ruling government. It's the last of the sixth administration that the Finance Minister is delivering this particular budget. He has to ensure that whatever he does is in the best interest of the South African public. But he's also a politician, and he and his colleagues will be eyeing, what happens post the election, which has been proclaimed for the 29th of May this year. So, given that backdrop, what are your thoughts?
Well, it certainly is a catch-22 situation par excellence. As you pointed out, there are different kinds of demands and requirements. One is to certainly address that major government debt ratio, which really is big and worrying. That implies trying to slash the budget deficit. But that in turn, as you pointed out, would require slowing down government spending, which is difficult to justify, especially on the eve of this election, where the ruling party runs the risk of not getting an outright majority. Meanwhile, you have civil servants clamoring for more. You've got the health department justifiably wanting more. Labour wants more. Everyone wants more of this cake, which is not growing. It's not growing because of very limited economic growth. So you have to start looking at alternative ways of trying to slash that deficit. And that's by looking at the revenue side, the tax side, trying to raise tax. Problem is, with this very slow-growing economy, it's difficult to imagine the tax base growing organically. So then you have to start digging deeper and start looking at possible tax rate increases. And none of us wants any tax rate increase. It becomes a question of, I suppose, the lesser of three or four different evils. So private income tax is a possibility, personal income tax, but consumers are beleaguered. They've been thrown to the dogs in terms of suffering economically, high interest rates and the like. Any further punishment there would be self-defeating. And bear in mind, 60% or more than 60% of the economy derives from consumer spending. You look at corporate income tax, always a very, very nice target for those who are kind of anti-business. But the problem is, at the same time, we desperately need foreign investment. By raising the corporate tax rate, we might deter that. Obviously, the sin taxes will go up. That's par for the course. Alcoholic beverages, cigarettes, etc. But then you've got VAT, the VAT rate, which is in many ways a sensible way of raising more tax, but again, politically, always problematic. On the eve of this election, perhaps even more so, because rightly or wrongly, the accusation is that VAT punishes the poorer members of society more than the more affluent members. So it really is, as I say, a catch-22 situation. And I think what we're going to find ultimately is the minister will try to make compromises between economic and fiscal sensibility and political expediency, and in the event we might end up with a neither here nor there wishy-washy kind of budget.
Now, Labour in particular and civil society is saying enough of austerity budgets, enough of cutting here, cutting there, because it's compromising service delivery. But at the same time, we've got a skyrocketing debt bill. The debt service costs are humongous. In the midterm budget, the minister indicated that we're going to spend 1.3 trillion rand over the medium term just on paying interest alone on the debt that we have. I mean, this is just, it beggars belief, right? So R1 billion per day, that's what we're roughly paying. But, it doesn't make sense for us to have austerity in a developing economy like South Africa. Can we grow our way? Can we, borrow our way into actually growing? Is that possible? What are the risks with doing that?
Yes, you can, but you get debt and you get debt. So you're quite right in pointing out our debt ratio spiraled from 27% back in 2007 to 70% plus currently. The 70% plus in its own is not necessarily a train smash. It's about the nature of the debt and how it's been spent over the last decade or so. And we find that quite a big chunk has been spent on civil servant salaries, has been spent on social grants, and has been spent on helping to pay interest on previously incurred debt. Now, none of these are sort of productive, fruitful kinds of debt. They just throw you further into a debt spiral. If we had borrowed all that additional money to build new roads and infrastructure, which is desperately needed, and a new ESCOM and a new this and a new that, we would be ecstatic right now. We'd be saying, well done, we've grown the economy into the future. The kind of spending doesn't grow the economy into the future. So again, it's that catch-22, short-term versus long-term. Yes, you can buy the illusion of growth by spending far more money as a government. That's very short-lived. It'll soon catch up with you. And the austerity measures going forward might be even worse. So what we really need is a situation where we start stabilizing things, stabilizing the debt, stabilizing the deficit, and set the scene, lay down the platform for better growth sometime in the future. But it's a hard trade-off to tell people just be patient a few more years, suffer a bit more, and one day all will come right. It's difficult, obviously.
Absolutely. Professor Andre Roux, more to talk about, but not enough time. He's from the Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you so much, sir. And so we do continue with our coverage discussing the budget, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bulelani Phillip. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you weren't too uncomfortable.
No, not at all.
All right.
I see that a lot of action building up around here in the precinct of the Cape Town City Hall.
So you're based here?
Various civil society organizations conducting protests. But on the political front, there's still political parties expecting really nothing new out of the Finance Minister's budget speech. Joining me now is the UDM's Chief Whip, Ngabayom Zikwangwa. Sir, thank you so much for making time for us. Basically, as the UDM, do you see any low-hanging fruits that the minister could latch on?
The first low-hanging fruit, since they have revenue shortfalls, is to increase corporate income tax and not touch value-added tax. And obviously, because it's an election year, no one will touch value-added tax because there will be protests upon protests until we get to elections. That's number one. Number two is that the minister has to outline a plan. We are not optimistic, though, of how he intends to reignite economic growth in the country. They have not been able to do that in the past 5 years because of poor governance measures that they've put in place, and they have not even been able to recoup monies that were stolen from the state. But nevertheless, he has to outline a plan of how they intend to reignite growth. But more importantly as well is to say, what allocation are they going, or funds, rather resources are they going to inject in the informal sector and the small business economy, sector of the economy, as a way of trying to fight against job creation. It is ludicrous that the president can reserve more than 20 billion rands on the presidential employment but the outcome of that has only been so far 40,000 sustainable jobs. There's no value for money in that process. Perhaps some of those resources must be channeled towards activities and initiatives that have maximum returns. We have always said, and we will continue to say, that there needs to be better alignment between monetary and fiscal policy, because fiscal policy tries to stimulate growth and monetary policy moves in the opposite direction due to factors that have nothing to do with domestic demand, geopolitical factors and geopolitical conflicts.
And just with regards to the social security, do you expect the minister to increase social grants?
He has no choice. We have a cost of living crisis because of the geopolitical factors I've cited. and because of inflationary pressures that the country is experiencing. So people cannot survive with the money or social grants that they were given last year. But obviously those will be aligned with inflationary increases because the country is broke. But that's where we're going to look to consider whether the increases that are going to be given on social grants are above inflation in order to make sure that people have livable social support or safety net that they provide.
Lastly, how do you think he intends to fund the National Health Insurance Scheme?
There's no money to fund the National Health Insurance Scheme. I don't think it's a priority at this point in time in terms of funding when the country is broke. There was an opportunity to do so when we had revenue windfalls from the mining sector, if you remember a couple of years ago. That was the time to actually pilot the rollout using those resources. Now we have to plan and see how we can generate revenue in order for us to be able to roll it out in future, but not now.
All right, thank you so much, Ngabayomzi Kwangwa, the Chief Whip of the UDM. And for more reaction, we cross over back to you, Nompu.
All right, we are here in Cape Town, of course, awaiting the delivery of the final budget in the 6th administration by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. We've been speaking to a number of different stakeholders, academia, economists, labour, and now speaking to somebody who's more in the market space, actually in the fund management space, looking at the areas of pensions and, you know, good investments for clients and so on and so forth. I'm joined by Hugh Hacking. He's the executive head of structured investments and annuities at Momentum Corporate. Thank you very much, Hugh, for joining us. So, of course, you know, everyone is watching the budget. But what are some of the things that you'll be keenly watching? I suppose from your perspective, you look after people's money. So you'll be looking at whether the government is trying to, you know, encroach on people's wealth.
Nompu, I think we're looking for a few things. The one, we're looking for clarity on the so-called two-pot system. Just in terms of finalizing that, getting that out the way. The other thing is we also, I think, looking for the growth story. Where's the growth story? How are we going to grow the economy? People tend to talk about taxes when it comes to budgets, but for us, we're looking at growth, and we're also looking forward to see what interest rates might do, and looking forward in terms of what investment markets and how they may respond.
So you touched on the issue of the two-pot retirement system. That's set to kick in on September the 1st, all things being well. Do you think that the industry is ready for it? I mean, we still see that at a parliamentary level, this issue is still being discussed and has yet to be fully sealed. But is the industry going to be ready? And more broadly, what are your feelings around the two-pot retirement system, whether it be from an industry perspective or for actual pension fund members?
Well, some of us are going to be ready. Maybe some people won't. But look, there has been a fair amount of work done across the industry. And so I suspect that one way or another, it'll work on 1 September. So I do think that there are probably still some finalizing touches to be put in place by some players, but I think we'll get there. In terms of the two-pot system itself, look, I think it has pros and cons. You know, people tend to belabor the cons of money flowing out of the system and so on. But a big pro of that is that, you know, a lot of people are in distress, and this system does give a way for people to access funds when they are in distress, and I think that's a good thing.
Now, it's been said, you know, that foreign investors have hugely divested out of the South African capital markets over a number of years, and it's been more marked in terms of, you know, the South African government bond space. Perhaps you can give us a sense of why you think that has been happening, and also what needs to happen for those flows to start coming back. I mean, you touched on the growth story.
Nompu, that's a complex story as to why, but there's a few key reasons. One is, of course, we looked at the sovereign bond downgrades, you know, some time ago, and that caused certain types of investors to have to disinvest from our bonds. Another one is, of course, confidence in the South African growth story and the South African sort of political stability itself in general. And so foreign investors tend to look at that growth story and they want to see where it's going to come from. And then, of course, you know, within our own economy, you know, we've seen high inflation, high interest rates, etc. And that has caused a loss of confidence, particularly also around what's happened with things like load shedding, which does concern investors a lot in terms of what local companies might do from an investment point of view. But, you know, so I think in terms of getting the flows back, I think it is about confidence, and it's also largely about growth. If investors see the path to growth and how the economy is going to grow, they will return and they will invest in the economy.
So one of the things we've been hearing, we know that government's got massive debt, and we're paying quite a lot in terms of debt servicing costs. But the idea that government or National Treasury may be able to tap onto the gold and foreign exchange reserves contingency pot, which is essentially basically a pot, just for the viewers' understanding, it's a pot of money that has accrued from the gains or the losses held by the South African Reserve Bank in terms of our foreign exchange, gold and foreign exchange reserves, which are to the tune of about 50 billion rand. So those gains and losses go into a pot which government technically can access. Now, what would that do to confidence if government were to tap onto that? Because it suggests that they're not able to tap elsewhere, and obviously they have to pay that money back to that pot. It's not theirs to just do with willy-nilly, as business bodies have said. They must return that money, but surely that's going to dampen confidence if they go down that route.
Look, in my view, the main confidence damper is around economic growth. It's complex in the sense that governments do access various sources of money from central reserves, etc., across the globe, and provided it's done within prudent limits, that's not necessarily an issue. And look, all governments do run a system of government debt. It's part of the stability of the financial system, and a lot of long-term investment is actually based on the issuance of government debt. So that's not entirely a bad thing. It's when government spending and the controls around the fiscal system get out of control, that's when there's a problem. At this point in time, I think we can look forward hopefully to a budget speech from the minister that remains prudent and remains within the bounds of those controls. And so I don't expect that any steps like that will have a profound impact on confidence. The big one is, what is our growth story? That's the big one.
Indeed, growth. Hugh Hacking, thank you so much for speaking to us, as he's from Momentum Corporate. We're going to hand it back to studio, and of course we're going to continue giving you more rolling coverage ahead of the budget and post it.
Thanks, Nompu. And I wonder if you can hear me. We've been talking here in studio, I wonder what kind of surprises we're likely to see out of the speech. It being an election year and that date being announced as the 29th of May. What have some of your analysts been saying about what kind of surprises are we likely to see out of the budget?
I think what analysts are saying is that it's going to be very difficult. For example, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana talked about potentially extracting a further 15 billion rand from South African taxpayers in this particular fiscal budget year that he's going to be giving us come 2 o'clock. But people are saying it's going to be very difficult for the ANC government through the National Treasury to raise these taxes in a significant way, because the South African consumer is under pressure, as is South African business, and it's an election year. So they wouldn't want to do anything that really upsets people, because it could affect the way they decide to vote. So I think people believe that it's going to be very difficult for Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana to make any serious moves in this budget. I think he's going to go gently, as he gently does it. He's going to probably tell us positive stories about some level of support to Transnet, but it's going to be quite a negative story in terms of the shortfall on revenue. And it's going to be interesting to see what he manages to do in terms of tax increases. We will get them in the usual areas of sin taxes and so on and so forth, but it's a very tricky situation that the minister's in. Diabo.
Thanks so much, Nompu. We'll catch up with you a little later.